Chapter 21. Lunch was some sort of petrified Mexican pizza, which was just fitting for Monday if you asked me. I felt like petrified pizza on most Mondays too, being forced out of my little cocoon of happiness in my bedroom and into the spotlight of Garvin High. Other than Saturday morning, my weekend had been blissfully uneventful. Mom and Dad weren't speaking for whatever reason, and Frankie was off at some church retreat with a friend. Not that our family ever went to church, something that was brought up time and again in the media right after the shooting. But apparently there were a couple girls that went to his friend's church, and Frankie was determined to get some time alone with one of them. Truth be told, if Frankie could get his hands on a girl at some point during the weekend, he'd do it without thinking twice, church retreat or not, which I thought was so wrong. But at least trying to get to third base at a church retreat kept him from having to endure Mom and Dad's Cold War at home. I could endure it just fine by staying in my room. Not like my parents expected anything different from me. They didn't even ask me to come down for dinner anymore. I'm guessing they probably didn't even have dinner. I just crept down when I figured everyone was off doing their own thing and rummaged something out of the fridge, ferreting back up to my room like a raccoon with garbage can spoils. Once, Saturday evening, I crept down into the kitchen after hearing the front door close only to find Dad at the table, hovering over a bowl of cereal. "Oh," I said. "I thought you guys were both gone." "Your mother went to some support group," he said, staring straight into his bowl. "There's nothing to eat in this goddamn house," he said, "unless you like cereal." I peered into the refrigerator. He was right. Other than a carton of milk and some ketchup, a small bowl of leftover green beans, and a half-dozen eggs, there wasn't much to be had. "Cereal's okay," I said, pulling down a box from the top of the refrigerator. "It's goddamn stale," he said. I stared at him. His eyes looked red-rimmed, his face unshaven, his hands looked rough and shaky, and I realized it had been so long since I'd looked at Dad. I hadn't even noticed how much he'd aged lately. He looked old, spent. "Cereal's okay," I repeated more softly now, grabbing a bowl out of the cupboard. I poured my cereal into the bowl and sloshed some milk into it. Dad ate silently. As I was leaving the room, he said, "Everything in this house is goddamn stale." I stopped, one foot on the bottom step. "Did you and Mom fight again or something?" "What would be the point of that?" he responded. You want me to order a pizza or something for dinner, I mean?" "What would be the point of that?" he repeated. Seemed like he was right. So I just crept back up the stairs to my room and listened to the radio while I ate my cereal. He was right. It was stale. I had slapped the petrified pizza onto my tray and was spooning some slimy canned fruit cocktail into the square next to it when I heard Mr. Angerson's voice just over my shoulder. "Not planning to eat that in the hallway, are you?" he asked. "Yeah, I guess I was," I said, going about my business. "I like the hallway." That's not what I was hoping to hear. Should I go ahead and line up a teacher for Saturday detention? I turned and leveled my stare at him, using every ounce of determination that I had left. Angerson didn't even bother to try to understand. I guess so. Stacy, who'd been in line just ahead of me, took her tray and ducked away, scurrying toward her table. I could see her in my peripheral vision saying something to Deuce and Mason and the gang. Their faces turned toward me. Deuce was laughing. "I'm not going to let you orchestrate another tragedy in the school, young lady," Mr. Angerson said to me, a little red coloring creeping up from under his tie to his chin. So much for the medal and the letter and all that hero and forgiveness crap, I thought. "This is a new school policy that no personal isolation is allowed in the school. Anyone who is caught regularly secluding herself from the student body will be carefully scrutinized. I hate to say, but some extreme cases could be subject to expulsion. Are we clear?" The line was moving around me, and out the door now, I realized, and kids were staring as they went. Some of them had curious grins on their faces and were whispering to their friends about me. "I never orchestrated anything," I answered, "and I'm not doing anything wrong now either." He pursed his lips and glared at me, the red creeping from his chin up his cheeks. "I would like you to consider your options," he said, "as a personal favor to the survivors of this school." He let the word survivors drop on me like a bomb, and it worked. I felt shaken by it. Felt like he said the word extra loud, and that everyone had heard it. He turned and walked away, and after a minute I turned back to the fruit cocktail. I loaded more of it onto my tray with shaky hands, even though my stomach suddenly felt very full. I paid for my food and carried my tray out into the main part of the commons. I felt like everyone was staring at me, like a bunch of rabbits caught in the middle of the night by back porch lights. But I looked forward, only forward, and headed out into the hallway. I could hear Angerson just inside the cafeteria talking to some boys about where French fries belonged and where they didn't, and steeled myself for another face-off when I heard footsteps coming around the corner. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, as I sunk to the floor, carefully balancing my tray on my lap. I opened my mouth to answer, but was interrupted as a bustle of motion burst into the hallway. Jessica Campbell, holding her lunch tray, whisked around Angerson and slid to the floor next to me. Her tray rattled against the linoleum as she shrugged out of her backpack. "Hi, Mr. Angerson," she said brightly. "Sorry I'm late, Valerie." "Jessica?" he said, one of those statements that sounds like a question. "What are you doing?" She shook her milk carton and opened it. "Having lunch with Valerie," she answered. "We've got some student council stuff to talk about. I figured this would be the best way to talk without getting interrupted." "It's so loud in there. Can't hear yourself think." Mr. Angerson looked like he wanted to punch a hole in something. He stood around for a minute, then pretended he saw something alarming going on in the commons and scurried off to break it up. Jessica giggled softly after he left. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Having lunch," she said, taking a bite of her pizza. She made a face. "God, it's petrified." I smiled in spite of myself. I picked up my pizza and took a bite. We ate silently side by side. "Thanks," I said around a mouthful of pizza. "He's totally looking for a reason to expel me." Jessica waved her hand at me. "Angerson's such an ass," she answered, and then laughed as I opened my notebook and drew a picture of a bare butt wearing a suit and tie. Chapter 22. From the Garvin County Sun-Tribune, May 3, 2008, reporter Angela Dash. Abby Dempsey, 17. As student council vice president, Dempsey was manning a fundraising table selling donuts. She was shot twice in the throat. Police believe that the bullets were stray, intended for a student in line approximately 3 feet to Dempsey's left. Dempsey's parents had no comment for reporters and are said by friends of the family to be grieving deeply for the loss of their only child. Mom called and left a message on my cell phone telling me she had a meeting and couldn't come pick me up. My first reaction was outrage that she would expect me to ride the bus after everything that had happened. Like I could just flop down in a seat beside Christy Bruder's posse now and everything would be fine. How could she? I thought to myself. How could she throw me to the wolves like that? I guess it goes without saying that I wasn't going to ride the bus home, whether Mom was driving me or not. Truthfully, my house was only about 5 miles away, and I'd walked the route more than once, but that was back when both of my legs were normal. I doubted my ability to do it now, sure that halfway there, my thigh would begin throbbing and force me to sit down and wait for the nearest predator to whisk me away. But I could probably make it a mile or so, I figured, and Dad's office was not much farther than that. True, getting a ride from Dad was definitely not top of my list. Probably not any higher up than giving me a ride was on his. But it would be better than trying to avoid the drama on a school bus any day. There was once a time when I was embarrassed that Dad's office wasn't more imposing. Here he was, supposedly this big-shot lawyer, and he was in a tiny brick satellite office, which, if you asked me, was just another way of saying hole in the wall in the suburbs. But today, I was glad he worked in a hole in the wall not far from school, because the October sun did nothing to warm up the air, and within just a few blocks of walking, I was beginning to be sorry that I hadn't taken the bus after all. I'd only been to Dad's office a couple times before. He didn't exactly put out a welcome mat for his family to show up at work. He liked to pretend it was that he didn't want us exposed to the, as he called them, lowlifes. he represented. But I think the truth was that Dad's office was his escape from the family. If we started showing up there, what would be the point of him always being at work? My leg felt tight, and I knew I was lurching along like a horror movie monster by the time I opened the big double glass door set in the brick of Dad's office. I felt glad to have made it. Warm air settled around me, and I stood in the entryway, rubbing my thigh for a minute before walking into the office itself. I could smell microwave popcorn, buoyed on top of the air and snaking around me, and I felt hunger twist inside of me. I followed the scent through the vestibule and around the corner to the waiting area. Dad's secretary blinked at me from behind her desk. I couldn't remember her name. I'd only met her once before, at some family picnics the head office had sponsored a summer or two ago, and thought it was Brittany or Brenna or something young and trendy like that. I did remember, though, that she was only 24 and had the most incredibly shiny, straight sheath of cocoa-colored hair that hung down her back like a superhero cape, and these big cow eyes that blinked slowly and housed giant, trusting pupils ringed with the color I can best describe as spring green. I remembered her being cute and shy and laughing longer than anyone else every time my dad told one of his stupid, corny jokes. "Oh," she said, a blush rising to her cheeks. "Valerie." It was a statement. She didn't smile. She gulped. Actually, gulped like they do in the movies, and I imagined her reaching for a red security button under the desk just in case I should pull a gun or something. "Hi," I said. "Is my dad here? I need a ride." She pushed away from her desk in her rolling chair. "He's on a conference she began, but she couldn't finish because Dad's door flung open at just that moment. "Hey, sweetheart, could you pull the Santosh file?" he was saying. Nose down in a pile of paperwork, reading. He walked around the back of Brittany Brenna's chair. She sat motionless, except for the color that crept up her face. Dad's hand landed familiarly on her shoulder as he walked by, giving it a soft squeeze, a gesture I hadn't seen him give to my mother in forever. Brittany Brenna ducked her head and closed her eyes. "What's wrong, baby? You seem tense." Dad started finally looking up, but he stopped when his eyes landed on me. His hand jumped from Brittany Brenna's shoulder and back up to the paperwork he was holding. The gesture was subtle, unassuming, almost so much so that I wondered if I'd seen what I thought I'd seen after all. I might have thought I was imagining things had my eyes not totally accidentally rested on Brenna's face, which looked almost wet with a furious blush. Her eyes were trained only on the desk in front of her. She looked mortified. "Valerie," Dad said, "what are you doing here?" I tore my gaze away from Brittany Brenna. "I need a ride," I said. At least I think I said it. I'm not entirely sure because my lips were so numb. Brittany Brenna mumbled something and darted out of her chair toward the restroom. I could have guessed that she wouldn't come out again until after I left. Mom had a meeting." "Oh," Dad said. Was I seeing things, or was his face looking flushed too? "Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. Give me a minute." He stepped briskly back into his office, and I could hear things shuffling around in there, drawers being shut, keys rattling. I stood rooted to my spot, beginning to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. "Ready?" Dad asked. "I've got to get back, so let's move." All business, all Dad. I expected nothing less. He opened the door, but I couldn't move. "Is that why you and Mom hate each other?" I asked. He looked like he considered pretending he didn't know what I was talking about. He cocked his head to the side and let the door close. "You don't know what you think you know," he said. "Let's go home. It's really not your business.